This is living instructions for today. That is, the instructions that you receive tonight will help you live life the way it was supposed to be lived. A lot of times we hear the phrase that life doesn't come with an instruction manual, and that actually isn't true, because the great Creator left us an instruction manual, and if we learn to live life based on that manual, then even in the midst of this crazy culture that we find ourselves in, our experience will be that of Jesus Christ himself. So we're talking about the attitude that Jesus possessed, because that's key to us having the kind of life that he intends for us to have. We also know that in order to think like him, you have to have the right perception of him and who he was. Because if you're off with respect to who you think he is and how you think he is, then your attitude is not likely to reflect what he wants it to reflect in order to represent him. So we've looked at a couple of places in the scriptures, and tonight I'm believing that you will jot down some more of the scriptures that I'm going to give you, because, you know, when we come together on these in these sessions, I'm giving you information. But you know, just giving you information don't change anything, right? Because it's information acted upon that makes a difference. All right? And so the information that you receive tonight, there are a couple of things you ought to do with it. Number one, you ought to go back over it. Okay? Reread it. I personally go back over the entire lesson. Thanks to modern technology, I can just point and click. And I can hear and see the message, and I can see y'all. So I know who's being attentive. I know which one of y'all laughing at my jokes. Oh yeah, I can see everything. But I go back over it and I hear something that I didn't hear when it was said the first time. And so I go back over it, and then I make the decision to think it. Not think about it, but to think it. I realize that sounds strange to you because you probably never heard that, but that's what you do. Let me see if I can illustrate it for you. How many of you are getting up tomorrow going to work? All right. Now, sitting here tonight, are you thinking your job?
No.
Nope. Not thinking. When will you think your job?
In the morning.
In the morning, when you get there. That's a conscious decision that you make. Okay, now I got to think XYZ company. And so whatever you do for XYZ company, you switch it on, because you got to think this. But when you leave, or shortly thereafter, you switch it off. Because if you go home, you start thinking home. Okay, kids, if there's a spouse there, or if it's just you, you think, okay, I need to do this. And so you leave from thinking the job or the work, and you start thinking home. If you're in school, when you are getting ready to go to school, what is your conscience being directed toward? Yeah, whatever your schoolwork is. You go to a math class, you're not thinking reset. Well, maybe some of you might be. But if you go to a math class, you are purposely thinking, okay, I got to think numbers. I got to think formulas. I got to think, you follow what I'm saying? You go to a geography class or a history class or whatever the class is, you purposely think that subject. So when I say I listen to the messages, I hear something that I didn't hear before, but I think it. So when we're talking about the perception that we should have of Jesus, I'm perceiving Jesus this way. Okay? That has to be, now for some of you, you may have to start to practice it so that it becomes a lot, I won't say easier, but you become a lot more proficient in it. Yeah, comfortable. Okay? Because if you've not done it, if you've been the kind of person that just let your mind just go wherever it want to go, whenever it want to go there, then it might be, it might take you a little bit more time and effort to say, whoa, come back here. Like your appetite. Like your appetite? Yes. Like some of y'all sneaking chips now? All right? Your appetite can run away with you if you've been accustomed to just letting it. And so when you try and reel it in, it's going to take you a little time and some effort. But you can get there. You can get your appetite to where you are in control of it instead of it being in control of you. No, we're not eating this. So when I say you're going to have to take this and you're going to have to go back over the information and you're going to have to think it, not about it. See, when I'm listening to it, I'm thinking about it, but then I start to think it. So when we read Philippians chapter 2, Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 5 says we ought to adopt this attitude. What attitude? The one that Jesus had. Well, see, Jesus thought all the time him. That's what he thought. In every situation, he always thought, okay, my Father. So when he says, I only say what he says to say, and I only do what he tells me to do, the only way that can possibly be is that he had to think him all the time. Okay? And there were times when, the flesh tried to rise up. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he's coming down to the final days of his ministry. And, that scene in the garden where we're told about him, struggling with what he has to face. Until he says, is there another way? Well, he knew there wasn't another way. But you have to understand that he had to learn obedience through the suffering. He'd never had to do that before. Okay? But he reeled it back in when he said, nevertheless, not what I want, but what you want. Okay? So these are things that you're going to have to put in practice. That means you're going to have to do them. So when we come together here on Wednesday nights, it's really just me giving you information. And you're supposed to take the information and go over it and then think it or put it in practice. There's some things that you are to do, like when we read about do all things without. Those words stick, don't they? Yeah. Do all things. Well, that means you're going to have to purpose, and I will not grumble, murmur, or complain about anything. So that's something that you have to do. You have to purpose to put that in practice in your life. Now, what we're talking about in these sessions is something that you have to think. I got to think Jesus is this. So we're talking about the man Jesus. And from verse 6 all the way to verse 11 in that second chapter, the apostle lays out for us what we might call the pre-existence of Jesus. So let's look at it. Verse 6 says, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, verse 7, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. You still there? Okay, so first we have the existent Jesus as God, and then him pulling off his divinity and being born, taking on flesh and blood, because that's what being born is about, right? All right, and so he humbled himself to that extent. Now, when you read this, thank God for faith. Because, man, this sounds like something out of a Hollywood movie. Jesus was God, and then he came to earth and clothed himself in human form. And then, we read over there in Acts chapter 2 last week how he starts ascending up. He starts going up right before those guys' eyes. But he didn't pull off his humanity when he went up that time. All right? So we looked at the man Jesus. That's what we have to think. And I said to you, you have to see him as a man if your faith is ever going to work for you the way it's supposed to work. Because in Genesis chapter 1, we read it, verse 26, 27, God said about the man that he had created, the human. What? Who remembers? What did he say about him? Huh? Have what?
Dominion.
Okay, he said, what is dominion? Authority, rule over. In short, what does it mean? You in charge. So that's what God said when he created man. So that meant, be it good man or bad man, he said man, what? Is in charge. That's what he said, the one that created it. We looked at Jeremiah chapter 27. God said, look, I created all this and I can do with it whatever I want to. I can give it to whoever I want to give it to. Well, see, if God said man is in charge, then if you're not a man on this planet, guess what? You don't have no authority here. Now, wait a minute. Somebody says, what do you mean if you're not a man? What else could you be? I'm glad you asked. She said what? You can be animal. As a lower form of animal. Like, huh? Lion. Tiger. Bears. Chickens. Okay. See, he didn't say let the sea creatures have dominion over all the earth. He didn't say let the winged creatures. He didn't say let the creatures that walk on the face of the earth. He said let the human have dominion over all of them and over all the earth. So if you're not a man, you ain't got no authority here. Now, you do understand that I'm using the man in the sense of human. So I'm talking about a male man and a female man, the human species. So when we get to the authority that Jesus has, we know that he has authority, first of all, because of what? Because of what? No. We know that he has authority because he's first a man. If you ain't a man, you ain't got no authority here. So Jesus had authority when he came. That's why it tells us repeatedly in the scriptures that he came in the form of a man. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, I'll tell you last week to read it. 2 words, Adam and man. It mentions the first Adam, and it mentions the second Adam. It mentions the first man, and it mentions the last man. Both in reference to, the first one was who? Adam. That word Adam, or that name, literally means man. And the second in reference to who? Jesus. In reference to Jesus. All right? So Jesus had to come as a man. He could not come as the divine God. Because God said man has authority in the earth. Okay? So when we're reading these things, again, you got to go back over them so you can get that in you. Jesus was a man, and he still is. He didn't pull off his humanity before he went back to, to heaven. He's a man there, clothed in a human body. All right? So this notion of you not submitting to any man, you need to lose that. Because I don't think you realize what you're saying. Well, ain't no man going to tell me what to do. Then you going to hell. You know why? Because a man is over all of this. And he has other men that he assigns positions of authority and requires you and me to obey them just like we obey him. No matter how you feel about them or what you think about them, he requires you, if you're going to be in good standing with the man, to submit to the authority of the other men that he has placed you under. And we are all under some other man besides Jesus. Okay? Now, like I said, we read it last week in Jeremiah 27. He says, God said, Nebuchadnezzar is a servant of mine. He wasn't even a Jew. Now, I asked you, because you didn't have the answer last week, to go back and look up who Nebuchadnezzar was. So, what sayest thou? Who was Nebuchadnezzar?
He was a king. He was king.
Yeah, we established that last week. Huh? Okay, he's the one that made a decree that you had to bow down to him or be tossed into. And God said, he is a servant of mine. And I'm going to make all the other nations subject to him, his sons, and his sons' sons, his grandson. That's what God said. Until I say his time is up. So, when he tells us to do all things without grumbling and complaining, that's what he means. He don't care what you think about the man sitting behind the desk at your place of employment, whether you like him or whether you don't. God's using him to pay you. So, if we're not thinking these things, then we keep ourselves. Do you know what it means to be illegal? An outlaw. What's an outlaw? Right, one that's outside the bounds of the law. Okay, that means you have done something to cross the authority. So now you're not legal. And if they catch you, what's likely to happen? You're going to get your freedoms Well, we understand that relative to our natural government, but we don't think that relative to the government that we are all under, including the natural governments. So if you are not following the law that he established, you an outlaw. And your freedoms get restricted. Don't have the health you want, the money you want, the relationships you want. And you will not have it until you become in right standing with the government again. So, when we read these things, again, you need to think about them, but you need to think them. So we're going back over them again tonight because you need to hear it. And you need to keep reminding yourself, Jesus is the man. Okay? Let's go back over to, we're still there in chapter 2 of Philippians. Verse 9 says, therefore, God elevated him to the highest place of honor and gave him a name above all other names, meaning his title is over every other titles. And that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. I'd say that's about every knee. Your knee is either here, there, or down yonder. And he says that God, the Creator, says that Jesus reigns, rules, governs, has authority over all of it. All right? Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 20 says that God raised Christ from the dead and seated him in the place of honor at his right hand. Right hand is an expression that means the highest place of honor. Everywhere in Scripture where you see those two words, right hand, it's talking about the highest honor that can be conferred. Well, we in our culture would probably better understand it if we would say in the office. Okay, there's God's office and then there's Jesus' office. All right, so Jesus is in the highest office next to God. Now, what's interesting is it tells us that, verse 21, he is far above any other ruler or authority or power or leader. All of that. Jesus is the man. God said there is no authority in heaven or on earth that he does not have authority over. Okay? And verse 22 says he put all things under his authority. So that's where Jesus is right now, a human being, a man. Okay? He's just as much a man as I am, or as you are, He's just as human as you are. Okay? Turn over to 1 Peter. Chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. And it tells us in verse 22, now Christ has gone to heaven. Oh, there it is right out there in front. He is seated in the place of honor next to God. You see it? Mm-hmm. And what else? All the what? All the angels, authorities, and powers, they accept his authority. All right, so go back over the scriptures that we gave you last week so that you can continue to feed that in to your conscience, that Jesus, God put everything under his authority. Now, We found out in Ephesians 1 and verses 9 and 10 that God's plan was, who remembers? Anybody remember? What's the plan? What's the plan that God kept concealed? To bring everything, where? Under the authority of Christ. Everything. To bring everything under Jesus' authority. That was his plan. Okay? Now, like I told you before, the significance of us allowing him to be a man is just huge. Because, see, God cannot lie. So when he says man has dominion over all the earth, he can't just rush right back in the earth and take it back just because man does something foolish with it. Because that would violate what he said. So he has to have a man. He has to have a man that is fully and totally submitted to him so that he can establish what he originally wanted when he put man here and gave man the authority. Now, the first Adam proved he couldn't be trusted. Can you be trusted? Can God trust you at your job, at your home, in your school, in your community? Can he trust you completely and totally to represent his interests, not yours, but his interests, no matter how you feel, think, or see about the situation? Can he trust you? And the answer to that question we all know. Not yet. He will, but not yet. All right? Thank God, not yet. Because some of y'all would have killed somebody on the highway tonight coming over here. All right? So he has to have this man. All right? And that man, that's why Jesus is called the last man, the last Adam. Because God says, okay, one man gave the authority that I gave to the whole human family to the adversary. Satan said it when he tempted Jesus over there in Matthew chapter 4. All this has been delivered to me. Now, he wasn't lying about that. Adam gave it to him. But if one man could give it to him, then by right, legally, one man could get it back for God. So Jesus didn't come as an angel. Stop comparing yourself to angels. Angels are subject to the authority of Jesus. And we are members of his body. Oh, isn't she just an angel? Shut that up. Stop saying that. I know it sounds cute, but it's biblically... Thank you. It's incorrect. You're much better than an angel. Angels are subject to you. Angels don't have authority in the earth. Man does. All right? Satan's not a man. So stop acting like he is. He's not a man. He don't have no authority. He don't have no authority in your house or anywhere else you go except he get it from you. And we know how authority works, don't we? How does it work? Come on. By words. All right, last scripture tonight. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. My God, tonight. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Jesus is a man whom God said is over everything in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. So we answer to him. We answer to him with respect to those of his supervisors that he places over us, whether it be your husband, your parents, your teacher, your employer, the president. All authority comes from God, whether you like it or not. All right? Because that's what he said. You at 1 Corinthians chapter 15. All right, here we go. Y'all, boy, y'all, bless y'all's heart. God like y'all. Giving you all of this good stuff. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 23. Let me read that. But there is an order to this resurrection. Christ was raised as the first of the harvest. Then all who belong to Christ will be raised when he comes back. Verse 24. After that, the end will come, when he will return the kingdom over to God. The Father, there's God the Father, having destroyed every ruler and authority and power. For Christ must reign until he humbles all his enemies beneath his feet. And the last enemy to be destroyed is death. For the scriptures say, God has put all things under his authority. Of course, when it says all things are under his authority, that does not include God himself, who gave Christ his authority. Then, when all things are under his authority, the Son, who is what? Who is a man. The Son will put himself under God's authority, so that God, who gave his Son authority over all things, will be utterly supreme over everything, everywhere. Thank God for Jesus. Amen. There's nothing wrong with government or authority if the righteous are ruling. And there's none righteous, Jesus said, but God. All right, so in the few seconds we got left, how are you going to apply this to your life? What do we do with this? Okay, this is great information to know that I'm hooked up to Jesus, who God said everything is under his authority. And if everything is under his authority, when Jesus says something, everything moves. So how are we going to apply this to our life? Because see, our esteem for, I mentioned last week, our esteem for the companies we work for brings about a certain attitude and a certain behavior. When I was growing up as a teenager, right across the street, there was a lady who worked for the phone company, Southwestern Bell. And there were companies like that in growing up that, you know, if you can get on there, baby, you set for life. The phone company was one. What was another one? Who? The who? The post office. Who else? T.I. Come on. Who? The government. She said the government. All right. See, you know, if I get on with them, you know, they got good benefits. I'm not likely to have to search for another job. I can be there, raise my family, buy me a house, buy me a car too, send my kids to college. I mean, I got it made because I am under that particular company. There was a sense of security and almost a sense of entitlement. Some of them had their own credit unions. I tried to join one of them. I didn't work for one of them, but, I tried to join one of them. And they told me, I had to be an employee. And so, I didn't get belligerent, but I did let them know I didn't appreciate them excluding me. What kind of operation is this? What, y'all don't like black people up in here? And I just happened to be there with a friend of mine who worked for the company, so that didn't fly over that well, But I'm saying that, man, that changed how you thought about your life. Because you knew about that particular company. You knew their reputation, their stability. But you don't know this kingdom. So you worry about everything. And you're afraid of everything. In spite of the fact that he said that the one that's head of this operation that I'm a part of has authority over everything. In heaven, on earth, under the earth. What am I afraid of if he is in charge? And that ain't even the best of it. That's good. That's real good. But he's also authorized me. You're looking at an authorized employee. What I got to be scared about? But see, if you don't know this, you got the wrong perception of this. You think this is just about church. And you come into church. And you paying your tithes and praying and do all the little religious things. Because in your perception, this is kind of like lotto. Maybe if I go to church 5 times, then the Lord will give me that new car. If I pay tithes for a month, then maybe my lights won't get cut off. But then when they get cut off, then you stop paying tithes because you don't perceive of it correctly. So we're going to talk about this so that you'll continue to get the information, but then you got to think about it, and then you have to think it. All right? All right. If you need a few seconds to prepare your tithes and offerings, go ahead and do so. For those of you who've been watching, let me remind you that on your screen you'll find a box that says accept the invitation. And I encourage you, if you're not a part of the family of God under the lordship of Jesus, accept his invitation to come on in. Click on that box and follow those instructions, and they will lead you right to the footsteps of Jesus himself. We thank you for joining us this week, and we look forward to you joining us again.